Hi, I have good news. 2 years ago, 7 activists went to Shell headquarters in London and spray painted on their windows things like Ecocide, Shell knew, climate criminals. Because Shell knew for 40 years before, before today that climate change was happening, it was human caused, and that it would cause a catastrophe. And they deliberately silenced people. They wrote papers to say this isn't happening. They funded anti-science scientists to say that this isn't happening, it's all just made up. And they've been a huge part of spreading the current mythology that climate change isn't really happening, or maybe it's just something that naturally happened and would have happened anyway, or that the scientists are wrong, or that these 1% of scientists that say the thing that I believe in are correct, and the rest of the scientists are just made up and paid by the government to get us to raise taxes on climate change and put us all in, kind of oppress us all and make everything terrible. So Shell has known for so long, as well as BP, Exxon, and other fossil fuel companies, that climate change is happening, that humans are causing it, and they've deliberately funded studies to make it seem like it's not happening and to make people doubt. Similar to tobacco lobbyists trying to say that tobacco doesn't cause cancer. Today, everyone accepts it, that tobacco causes cancer, and it took so long to get to that stage. And similarly, in 20 years, I hope, everyone will accept that climate change is being caused by humans, that it's a result of burning fossil fuels, and that we need to do something about it. But in 20 years, it'll be too late. We need to act now. We need to act 30 years ago, but we need to act now, and we need to do things about it. So they spray painted the windows, they smashed the windows, and they glued themselves to the building, so that police had to remove them forcibly. And over the last 2 weeks, they've been in court, in Southwark Crown Court, and I met them there, and I was on jury for a different case, and I got to speak to them during lunchtime and understand their case. And on Monday, after my jury service finished, I managed to take the day off and watch them in court and see what was happening and see them explain that there's 7 of them, and they're explaining that, yes, they definitely smashed those windows, they definitely spray painted those windows, they fully accept that. But what they did, they were claiming they were saying they weren't guilty. They were saying that this is entirely proportionate, that Shell is doing hugely worse damage, and it's all legal when Shell does it, but when they do it, it's not. And that it's kind of a justified response, that if you saw a burning building with a child in it, you would smash the window to take the child out of that burning building to save that child, and that they were smashing Shell's windows for the same reason, to make people notice that the world is on fire, we need to act. So it's a really important action, and it's really important that they did this. And just earlier today, the jury was deciding whether or not they were guilty. The judge has specifically told them that they had no defence in law for breaking those windows, for spray painting those windows. But the jury went through it, they discussed it. They'd been having 2 weeks of explaining how bad Shell is, the consequences of climate change, why we do need to act, and it's hugely important that we do this. And the jury decided that they were not guilty, and that they can be let off. So this is amazing. I've spoken to them, not since they've been let off, but I spoke to them beforehand. They were not expecting to be let off. They did the crime fully expecting that they would go to prison. One of them said that they were scared of going to prison and they didn't want to break the windows, but they were much, much more scared of the consequences of climate change and not acting. And that is so true. I personally am terrified of what will happen if we don't act now and get people to do things about climate change, because it is really terrible. If you look at the graphs, they just look like that. And we've known for so long that it is happening, and the graph is just increasing and increasing. And we need to reduce our emissions hugely, very quickly. If by 2030 we've not at least halved our emissions, then we're in a really bad situation. And even then, that's only giving us like a decent chance of getting out of it, and it's not that high. So we really do need to act as soon as possible. We are already experiencing climate change. If we completely stop now, we will still experience the effect of climate change. We're already more than 1 degree hotter than we were. If we start reducing emissions now, then we can make sure we stay below kind of 1.5 degrees. They're still quite unlikely, but staying below 2 degrees would still be a huge difference between if we don't act, and then we could quite reasonably be 4 degrees above average temperature. And even beyond that, the science, because it's so unclear, we don't know what it's going to be like. We can't tell you whether it's going to be 2 degrees, whether it's going to be 4 degrees, whether it's going to be 8 degrees. I'm hoping that 8 degrees won't happen. It probably won't, but we don't know. We can't tell. And it's not just a temperature that's kind of everywhere. It will be, some places it will be higher, so it's fluctuating a lot. So the temperature in a day fluctuates maybe 20 degrees or so. So it will mean when it's really hot, it will be that much hotter. So all those heat waves will be so much hotter. All those forest fires will be that much hotter. And it will make just really bad. We're already losing food. We're not producing as much food in the UK as we usually do. And globally, we're not producing as much food as a normal year because of the climate and also soil and biodiversity crisis. So we do need to act now. We need to completely change what we're doing. And if we're not, we'll be too late. Yeah. But this is an amazing thing that's happened, that they've been let off. It shows that kind of normal people can make that decision, even when told kind of this is illegal, that it's morally correct, that these people shouldn't be going to prison for trying to save the world. And it's why I volunteer with groups like Extinction Rebellion to try to save the world, why Greta Thunberg and the climate strikes are so important, why talking about it and acting and getting people together to protest against the government, protest against big companies like Shell and BP really matters and makes a difference. So 2 years ago, after breaking those windows, they wanted a climate emergency and ecocide to be made law, so that when companies drill up countries for their oil, hugely pollute and destroy ecosystems and livelihoods, that is illegal. Instead of currently, it's perfectly legal, you can do that, it's totally fine. There's no reason you can't do that within the law. So they're trying to make that a crime. It's still on the way, and it's not a crime yet, but we are pushing for it. The UK government, after those protests, both the Shell targeted one of the smashing windows, and 10 days of sustained protests in London, blocking streets, trying to make it difficult for people, and kind of making it difficult for the police and the government to kind of act. The government declared that we are in a climate emergency. They didn't mention that we're in an ecological emergency also. And the government changed their emission targets from 80% reduction by 2050 to 100% reduction by 2050, or net zero. This still isn't good enough because, as Greta Thunberg says, they have creative accounting, so this isn't including external things. So all that, we buy so much from China and other countries, and all of their emissions, we're not saying there are emissions. All our flights that don't happen within the UK, we're not counting those emissions, and the emissions from flights are huge. But they changed their targets from 80% reduction to net zero. It's not enough. We need further. We need to act as soon as we can. We need to make these changes right now. But they are being made. These actions do make a difference. They get the governments to act, they get companies to care, and they get people more aware of the issues because the media reports about it, and they make people care more, they make people email their MPs. So do get involved any way you can. So directly protesting and being on the streets and getting the government to act and telling the government to act is really important, as well as everything else, and just talking to your friends about it, making reductions in your own life, and emailing your MPs, telling companies, hey, is this bit of plastic yours? And getting those to act. It's already important, and it does make a difference. We used to think the divine right of kings was inescapable. If you told someone 500 years ago that they wouldn't be ruled by a king, they'd get to choose their own leaders through voting, they wouldn't believe you. The king's in charge, you can't change that. But that has changed. It was such a huge change. It was an impossible change, but it happened. And this, getting through this crisis, beating climate change, saving the ecology of the world, it feels impossible. But changes have happened before, and they will happen again.